Center. I thank you and welcome you to our virtual auditorium for BAC's Conversations on Art series with our host, Meg Linton, and guest artist, Fran Siegel. Brentwood Art Center's success is due to our incredible and generous board of directors, leadership council, donors, staff, faculty, and students who support the BAC through thick and thin. And I want to thank our anonymous donor who has made the Conversations on Art series possible for the next 12 months. We can only do all that we do because of our generous donors who believe everyone should have access to the arts and to education. And I'd like to be sure to mention that BAC's new campus in Santa Monica, where we are here today, located at 1625 Olympic Boulevard, we're open, and that our winter 2024 term will begin on January 9th. The campus is very close to 18th Street Art Center, Crossroads School, and there is a metro rail stop right nearby. We're excited to be offering in-person classes once again, and so your support is more important than ever. Come take a class. Now, to the meat of the matter. Our host, Meg Linton, and I met at Otis College of Art and Design while Meg was the director of exhibitions for the Biennial Gallery, and I was the dean of continuing education. Our divisions collaborated on many public programs, and we are thrilled to bring Meg's love and respect for artists to the BAC. Meg has been visiting artist studios for well over 20 years in her various roles as director and curator of contemporary art spaces in Southern California. Currently, Meg is lead producer on a documentary film about feminist performance art in Los Angeles in the 1970s and 80s called Acting Like Women, directed by Sherry Galkey. She is working on an exhibition about the artist Keith Julius Puccinelli that opens September of 2024 at UC Santa Barbara. She's writing a novel and, of course, conversing with Fran Siegel for BAC this afternoon. I'd like to welcome Meg Linton.
Thank you, Amy. It's always good to see you. I want to thank the BAC and our anonymous donor and everyone who works behind the scenes to make this program possible. We've had a great following, and I really appreciate all of you attending today. So welcome to Conversations on Art and our virtual studio visit with Fran Siegel. And as usual, before I introduce our guest, I have housekeeping. We are recording today's presentation, and we ask that you please mute your microphone and turn off your video. This avoids static or feedback when we're recording. During the conversation, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and I will either work them into the conversation or I'll save them until the end, but we'll get them all answered. And I've also put information in the chat box for you and with instructions on how to save the chat. So if you want to look at any of those links or articles about our guests today, you can do that on your own time. And I just found out that our talk with Flora Cow last month is now up online on the YouTube channel where we post all the recordings of these videos. So if you ever miss one of our live talks, you can always go back to the YouTube channel for the Brentwood Art Center and check it out. So today we have Fran Siegel. She is an East Coast transplant. She moved to San Pedro about 20 years ago, secured a professorship in the art department at Cal State Long Beach, and has become an essential member of the Los Angeles art scene. She has participated in residencies and exhibitions and festivals around the globe, and yet her work is always about the local, the neighborhood, or the garden. She's interested in big ideas of migration, connectivity, borders, geopolitical forces, and environmental advocacy. But somehow, she always brings it back to the personal and the handmade. Her work and her humanity foster kinship and inspire the curious. We're fortunate to have her here today. So Fran, welcome.
Hello. Can you see? Oh, there I am. Yes.
Yes, we can
Hello.
see.
Thank you for that introduction. That was quite beautiful.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking for a long time. We
That's
realized
true.
today it's 20 years. So
Yep.
it's very exciting when you first moved into town. So we're going to just jump into images. And we're starting with a picture of Fran working in her, this is your studio space.
Yes. And
Yes.
the other thing that's kind of interesting, I think, about this image is that it's the backside of something, which has always been important to me because that shows how things are made. And I never really prioritize the backside because I'm always using the wall, or mostly using the wall, but the backs are really important.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I'm a quilter. So the back sides of quilts, it's like when they're pressed properly, they're just as fascinating as the front because all the seams have to go in particular directions for things to lay flat. So that's what I think of when I see this.
And it's also the thought process sometimes is more revealed on the back because it's not so much the presentation of it.
Right.
Yeah. So
It's where you kind of have, it's kind of where the notations live.
right.
So what are we looking at here?
So this is at MOCA. It is in their acquisitions, in an acquisition show. And I love this photograph because my work is surrounded by favorite artists. That's an Elliot Hunley piece, and a Yo-Yo Kasuma piece in the foreground.
Nice.
And it's I think it's interesting to see the scale of my work in this image as well.
So tell us what the materials are, because
So I think the next,
fairly flat.
yeah, the next image actually shows the piece, I think.
There we go.
Yeah. So they're all paper. It was a series of drawings that I began in 2007. And they started from flights that I took because I had recently moved here. I was still flying back and forth to the East Coast, and I started to photograph the landscape from the airplane. And then later, actually, Jody Zellin introduced me to a pilot who flew lower and in the in-between spaces, which was really great. The pieces or the parts or the particles in this drawing are all mostly cyanotypes that are actually of close-ups of the landscape that then got converted into cyanotypes through exposures. And then I used the density changes to duplicate some of the values that were in my photographs from the airplanes. And then the other thing that is kind of interesting about this series is that they're from multiple points of view. And so I'm fusing them together as well. So it's not really a fixed point at all.
Right. I was going to say that there's a feeling of depth and flatness that happens, but it doesn't feel like you're just looking at like a topographical map where you just have the one perspective looking down.
Right. It really oscillates both in its material and also just the fact that the white of the wall is the lightest value in it. So it engages the space around it. But also the point is oscillating as well. Yeah.
Right.
And this from 2007 to like pretty much 2017, so for 10 years, I was really working on these very large drawings and, piecing all these parts together and trying to, in each one, come up with some other challenge that was mostly about drawing. So in this one, there's a seam that occurs that's not a physical seam. You can kind of see it goes down the middle of the drawing. So that's like a glitch that's in the the marrying of these images together, but it's not in the drawing itself. And then the thing was, or the challenge that I had in this one was like how to go from activity to like silence or the sky or the mark fading out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where the hash marks are.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was
Nice
really
solution, but it's a nice solution how it fades out, but then the hash marks show up in other parts.
right.
Yeah.
I've been really interested in Mirandi's prints and drawings, and really thinking about how density changes can carry images. And you know, anyone who has worked with me as a student would know that outlining is like a very bad thing. So yeah. So I'm really interested in this idea of activating surface. This piece actually LACMA owns, and it's funny, and now that I see it again, because the design of the new building actually is a lot like the shape that works through this drawing. But which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
But this is actually the most literal that they ever got.
Where you really can see a cityscape.
Yeah. That was about the time when I kind of knew it was almost ready to stop.
Now, are you gluing the pages together, or are they
Oh, I'm
stitched
glad you
together,
asked
or are
that.
they?
So it's mostly woven together. So all
Okay.
of these roll up as one piece. It was really important to me to have that be the case, so that there wasn't, like in an install, there wasn't something that was a stray unit.
Right.
But they are glued but also woven. So
Okay.
the glue sort of holds them in place, and it's a flex glue that you know, that it's like a book binding glue, so it's not brittle.
Beautiful.
So this one is where I actually painted the wall and engaged the darkest and the middle value with the wall itself. And the drawing just became suspended in front of it. But again, all of it is tied together with these strings and sort of stretched out, you know, to hold its place.
So in looking, we're kind of seeing the progression of your work
Mm-hmm.
with the same idea, but then you keep pushing it and pushing it. So how, I mean, do you set parameters for yourself before you start making this, or while you're making the other one, you think, oh, I'm gonna start stitching them together with string, or kind of how does your evolution of the thought process go in terms of it, how you're approaching the materials?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question, because I think it's like the essential question of creativity.
Mhm.
You know, how do you keep something interesting for yourself, and also you know, move things along? Like, I believe that there's a real sweet spot in how different the work can be from each other, but also different enough. Um,
Mhm.
so that each time, like, even though I sort of stayed with this for 10 years, each drawing approached a different challenge. And mostly it was a material challenge, or a like density challenge, or a way in which to solve a problem, or some shift in imagery. But there was always something. So this actually was when you and I worked together, and the challenge here was the architecture. So you can see how the last piece sort of led to this piece.
Mhm.
And then I think what, for me, there's a couple of things that are interesting about this piece. I mean, one thing is that the vertical lines become almost like digital pixels, but in the handmade. So I was working from digital imagery, you know, again, that I was compositing together from like one flight, from different perspectives. But then I was also able to split it apart by straddling the skylight, so that this piece also had the possibility of walking through it, which I think maybe the next image shows that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then again, the backside, which in this case was shown, and I just painted it out white. But I like this idea of separating the values so that the lightest lights were in front, and then this darker value was behind it.
Yeah, it was absolutely beautiful because I got to live with it every day because it was in the Maltz Gallery, and just watching the light move across the sky over the skylight was just so the shadows would change, and it would glow, it would darken. It was really beautiful. And I was really glad you accepted the challenge.
Yeah, well, I think that's sort of the best thing in working with a curator that sort of knows your work and then pushes you to a certain place, which I think was good. And I think that at that point, nobody had really addressed the skylight in that space. And then I think later Corey Newkirk did a beautiful piece that hung down from it. Do you remember that?
Yeah, we started using the skylight in different ways.
So that was
so no, you kind of broke the barrier with that. And then people really saw that you could play with the light.
Yeah.
And energy of
such a beautiful space.
It's like a little corridor of light that breaks up the gallery space.
Yeah.
So these are your residencies and fellowships, and you've traveled all over.
Yeah, so I really I love this idea of going to a new place and coming there with a bunch of tools that you've sort of used before, but then nothing else. And so, in the time usually it's like a month or maybe a little more, I research the area, figure out what's important, and then start to make work that reflects that. So in this case, this was at the Siena Art Institute, and what was really interesting to me were the multiple walls. So there was the medieval center, and then as you got out, further out, there became 9 entry points into the city. And so I started to see that as like a circulatory system. And so that's how this drawing came to be in terms of its structure. And I really I'm a real additive person. I like working where I'm accumulating things and rarely subtracting. So my experience or my discovery period is all a part of the work itself. I actually, in later pieces, have worked with issues of misunderstanding and mistranslation, which I think is like an honest way of addressing something in the work. This was at the Camargo Foundation. I was there twice, but the first time, this is the first piece, and I
Where
was
is the foundation?
It's in France, in the south. It's really beautiful, and it's right near Marseille. It's the next town over, and there's a lot of walls and a lot of fences that are put up by landowners, and I was really interested in this idea of a sort of polite keep out or a decorative keep out, and how that also related to some of the topography of the area. So that's what this piece became about.
It's interesting when you're saying a fence to keep out. So there's this whole notion, if you have cattle and so forth, of either you're a fence in state or a fence out state. So you either fence the cattle so they're in, or you fence so that they can't go out. So it's
Right,
interesting to have the different perspectives of a fence. So
right. And
Yeah.
I think fencing is interesting too, because there's, there's, yeah, multiple sides of it, and how you're looking through it or
Mhm.
looking out from it.
Yeah. Are you trying to
So
keep the wildlife out, or do you want to
yeah,
put something in? And yeah, it's interesting.
but the other thing that sort of crops up in this piece, which I think starts for things that come later, is how the landscape is viewed. So there's this little image of the landscape, sort of like a direct landscape painting. And then there's other, which is on the bottom in the center. And then there's other elements that are about the landscape. And so they're starting to fuse together, like where design and real natural forms intersect. And that's something I'm currently actively working with.
Yeah. It's a nice play because it shows the richness of it instead of always just showing land from like the proprietary perspective.
Right, right. So I think I'm really interested in landscape painting, but from a completely skewed position, you know. This was also in the south of France, but it was at this foundation called La Napoule, and it's near on the other side, which is closer to Nice. And so this was where they had there was a history of this place that one of the grandfathers had this porcelain collection. And so I started to see the connection between some of the designs of that existed in plates and the relationship to plants in the landscape. And that's what I started to work with here. Also how light passed through the studio, and so on. I had an amazing space there.
Yeah.
The other thing that I would say about these residencies is that I always go to places that don't cost anything, and that's really important because I think that it's you have enough expenses as an artist, and to be invited to these places is really important, to be able to take time and not accrue more expense, and really work. So that's
Right.
often where things, early stages of or parts of works get made. Like that's what happened here. I went back to Camargo and I started to, or I continued to work with the fencing material, not material, but photographing a lot of these iron grates that are decorative. And then I started to make cyanotypes out of stencils that I made from the photographs. So there were multiple sort of layers of translation.
Is this
Some,
still paper or
no, now
is
this
some
is fabric.
fabric? Okay.
Mhm. So I had made the stencils out of paper, and then used those to expose the cyanotypes. And then I could also move them around as the sun moved. So they also had some, like this cyanotype on the right has multiple images that are on it on the top right. It's also moving. This was last year. I went to a really wonderful place that I would suggest to anyone who's signed in here. There's a place called Monson, which is in Maine, and it is really beautiful, and it's a very well-funded foundation. It's also very young. So it's maybe not as competitive as some of the other places that I had been to, and it was just fantastic. So I had thought that I would do something based on Thoreau and walking in the Maine woods, but then as I was actually listening to all these Thoreau audio books read by other
Mhm.
people, and I I grew really tired of the writing. It actually seemed really so dated and really problematic. But it did sort of spur this idea of daily exposures. So I had
Right.
this roll of fabric that I kept coating and kept bringing out and
Oh,
collecting
nice.
each day I walked. And then I sewed on, or I attached on, other parts that were patterns, historic patterns from that area.
That's
And then
amazing.
there's a map of the lake that that it was, surrounding, and some routes in and out of the town, which was really interesting.
So
So also,
when you're on these residencies, are you connecting with other artists as well and
yes.
locals?
Uh, they're not so much, but there were 10 of us there, and there were 4 artists, and we were all sort of working on projects that were daily activity projects, and
Oh, nice.
we visited each other's studios at least like once a week. It was actually kind of amazing. But that was the other thing I was going to say about this place that was so interesting, is that they tried to revitalize this town that was essentially a um, like a mining town that had not, it had gone defunct. And
Mm-hmm.
this person came in and restored all the old buildings. It was like an old quarry
Oh,
before.
wow.
And so the landscape was sort of damaged in a way. There were like these, slate was all
Scars.
over the, hmm?
The scars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did these drawings as well. I had a few different activities, but these were also, each of them started out with a little image that I
Mm-hmm.
found in some travel brochure of the area, and then I would sort of merge that into the landscape.
Excellent. And these are more part of that series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the other thing, is that I have a suitcase that I bring to these residencies that is the largest suitcase that you can check. And then I have paper that I cut. I have a folder and paper that I cut to fit the suitcase. So there's always like a whole strategy of how to approach these, so that there's yeah, somebody, Siobhan just wrote the size. I think it is,
Yeah.
I think it's smaller than 30 by 22. I think it's actually 17 by 22 maybe. But it is a size that I work with, that is like the bag of tricks size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could write like a little travel guide for artists who are doing residencies on what
Yeah.
to bring and how to bring it and how to bring it home too. Because once you have finished product, it's different.
Yeah.
Be able to ship that back. You want to ship it back safely. I mean, your
Right.
materials seem pretty rugged.
Yeah, I mean, fabric can always be folded,
Right.
but then it can't be merged. Like every time I've worked with fabric and paper together, they have to be separated later and then shipped back and then reconstructed.
Right.
So this is a project that I did in Santa Barbara, and I was invited by Elise Gonzalez to do a project on Santa Barbara, and I created a body of 50 drawings that explored multiple aspects of the landscape, and also the view that Santa Barbara had of itself as a utopia, which I found really problematic. And because in a way, that idea of the utopia really depended on um, the engine of Los Angeles, that the distasteful engine of Los Angeles to support the beauty of this other idyllic place.
Right.
So I tried to work with some aspects of that. There had also been this very strange camp, like homeless encampment that resulted out of veterans from World War II. And that ended up as the site of the zoo. So
Mm-hmm.
those images started to get fused together as well. And then this became reinstalled. So the museum bought the project,
Oh,
and
wow.
then they reinstalled it in another way, which was always a part of the thing. Like the 50 drawings come in a box, and then they can get reassembled in whatever way the curator wants. And so this is
Mhm.
a whole different configuration, which I really love.
It has to be fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually liked this better than the one that I did. So yeah, but this is the I'm working on the on a metro station, which is Wilshire and La Brea. And
Mhm.
and this is two walls that are going to be on the concourse level of the La Brea station, and it has to do with how light travels up and down Wilshire Boulevard, and also the disappearing Art Deco details that are in a lot of the buildings, and the tar pools. And so there's all these moments that are you know, that are fleeting in these two images, in these two walls. The other thing is all the photos I took using dichroic lenses. So I was
Mhm.
never photographing exactly at the thing. It was always reflected from behind.
Can you
So,
explain the lens a little bit more?
excuse me?
Can you explain just the lens, how it works a little
So,
bit more?
so dichroic film, it's like a piece of glass that's coated with all of the spectrum. So if you hold it up, you know, it either you can have like a violet yellow, um, you know, opposite. So if something is in shadow, it might appear violet or yellow, or you could have a blue orange one of these. And they're pieces of glass that you can look through. So I actually held them up to the camera and really photographed what was behind me. So that's also why the images have multiple layers. It's not done through Photoshop, it's actually the original photo. And then
Yeah.
the other thing that I tried to work with here was the idea of the tile itself, which will come up in a later in a later project that I did. Oh, right there.
Oh, there we
um,
go.
but actually, let's go back to
Okay.
the metro. So in this case, some of the tiles, so all the tiles are 18 inches by 36 inches. And in some cases, the wall, like there might be one image that's just one tile. Or there could be an image that spans the whole vertical, or, you know, the
Mhm.
whole vertical height of it. So I tried to work with that, where something just gets inserted either by a shift in color or a shift in image, or there's a kind of weaving of these things all together to show a layered idea about time.
And how long is the expanse? Is it?
It looks nice and small here, but it's 80 feet, I think.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that'll be
So
amazing to kind of walk by it and feel the color shifts and the light shifts.
yeah, and also I'm working with a wonderful fabricator up in Oregon that was able to get the depth into the tiles. So they're
Mhm.
actually back painting um, white and black on ones that I've
Mm.
chosen for each. And then in some cases, there's, instead of like where there's an image or a line here, there's actually a gap. So it shows the depth of the black that's on the back. So it has this
Wow.
really odd thing. They were the only company that was actually able to work with, you know, the depth of the glass as part of the project. So that was really great.
Isn't it wonderful to find people who can do those things? They
Yeah,
just,
I mean, in
yeah,
this case, it was a whiz of a person who had taken over his dad's company, and the knowledge that he brought and enthusiasm that he brings to it is just going to bring everything to a whole other level. It's
that's
really,
exciting to have a good
yeah,
collaborator.
yeah, it's really great. So this actually, can you go a little further and then go back?
Yeah.
Because I didn't, yeah, okay, right here.
Yep.
So this is something that exists both in Portugal and it exists in Brazil. I had I was awarded a Fulbright to Brazil, and I was working on a project with the Fowler Museum. And I became really fascinated with these mistakes, with these tiles that somehow, and I had all these different theories, and now I sort of, the thing that's probably the true cause of it all is very benign, which is just water damage. But I thought that at the time that it was possible that this was a subversive act, that these are colonial tiles, they're in churches in Salvador, Brazil. And I thought that maybe there was a chance that the narrative was just getting all messed up and reordered. And I really love this idea of this kind of messed up narrative where nothing really connects, and you can tell the story almost as a story of memory, and that different the past, the far past, is actually much smaller, and maybe the present is something that you have much more access to.
Right.
So anyway, you can go back to the
But then you found out.
Oh, so I found out later, like through seeing churches in Portugal recently, that mostly it happens on the bottoms of things where water has seeped in. And so a lot of the replacements are just done because there's a box of tiles and they have to be, a tile falls out and you have to replace it with whatever you have on hand. I mean, that's
It's a
kind of
pragmatic solution and not
yeah,
a subversive one. But
right.
then in a way it is, because it is kind of dismantling the story.
Correct. And either way it works,
Yeah.
So I created this very elaborate drawing. I was actually working with something that was sort of way over my head and kind of outside of my lane, which is also something I'm truly interested in, which is not it's a kind of non-popular idea, is that I was working with this Igun piece that the Fowler had in their collection, and I didn't want to ever depict it or illustrate it, but I really wanted the parallel that I came up with to work with was plants. So
Can
the
you
land,
just explain the Agun first for a second?
okay.
Yeah.
So Igun or Igungun is Afro-Brazilian worship of ancestry. So there's a belief that, and it occurs in multiple cultures, that our ancestors are very important to us in terms of the lineage. But when there's a break in the lineage, like a shift from one location to the other, you need to somehow restore that. And plants become a very interesting way to make that restoration, or to make those links possible. So for example, every person has multiple orishas or multiple deities that are associated with them, that define their characteristics. And then specific plants are associated with each orisha. So you could actually read the landscape as you could also read the population. Like people and places become merged together through this idea of plant life and the spiritual significance of these things. So I made this very elaborate woven drawing, and it was all about the relationship between plants and place, but specific plants. And I tried to work with physical means, like I made some of the plants out of porcelain. And I also tried to work with the shadows as an ephemeral, further ephemeral on one bookend and physical on the other end. This is one of the most amazing sites. It's on the island of Itaparica, which is where the Sacatar Foundation is. And I had studied, my Fulbright actually was with Museu Afro-Brazil, and I had studied all of these things ahead of time. And then when I arrived on the island, I was able to work with the director there who had ties in to the community, and somebody actually took me to this amazing place where there are all these specific plants that that are there, and people pick the plants for designated people pick the plants for ceremonies. So here's an example of where these things traverse multiple boundaries. So there's the plant existing in a tile. In the church, it exists in this Misericordia is the town on Itaparica, and then it shows up in my drawings. So, you know, multiple mediums of the same image.
Yep.
This is the well, the spring that that these plants are nurtured from, and on the right, it's a detail of the drawing and also the overlap and the weaving of it.
So this is a detail of what we saw on the big wall.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then did you have, these are the ceramic pieces, but did you have a key to what some of the plants were?
Yeah,
Or
there's, I
are?
think the next slide actually, or the next few slides show that we can go back and forth.
Okay.
So,
Well,
and then the one after that, go one more and then we'll just work backward. So I went several times into that preserve or reserve, and I copied down names and you know, tried to find out from multiple people what these things were, and I took photographs and made drawings, and in some cases some of these things led nowhere. In some cases they were very specific, or somebody would you know, agree, okay, yes, that is that. In some cases I heard something wrong, like it was in Portuguese or was it in Yoruba, and it was again like these kind of miscommunications also. But I pieced together a whole story of this. And you know, probably I think probably like 95% of it is accurate. And these leaves again are significant leaves that were the physical presence, or the most physical in the piece. But they also refer to the Portuguese porcelain trade, and
right.
you know, and how maybe these real leaves become motifs in ceramics.
And show up in other places as well.
Mm-hmm. So the other thing about that too is that leaves are like, the landscape can appear almost, and I think maybe Christina Newhouse had mentioned this to me at some point, that leaves can appear as though, or plants, they're the most benign subject. But isn't it interesting when they can become a very poignant part of a socio-political idea? And I think that's really powerful. So this is the back of that piece. And I think that's kind of interesting. It wasn't featured, but it was shown. And actually, the Long Beach Museum showed this again and acquired it, and they showed it facing, the back was facing the street and the window, through windows. So that was interesting.
Yeah, it was an interesting installation of that.
Yeah, I liked that installation.
And now this is part of a new project you've been working on and researching.
Yes. So I'm working on a project about wetlands, and it's a project that will be a PST part of the art and science thing that's coming up in 24. And it's my interest in wetlands was also about this idea of these in-between spaces, but they're also very important because it's the place where we might be able to have some effect. Like we can't necessarily do work out in the ocean, but we can, restore some of these wetlands that will do so much. I mean, these
Well,
particular
their filtration systems.
right, for CO2, and they also can take on water and also be on land, so they're wet and dry simultaneously. This is the very beginning of the project in my studio. So the 3 drawings that are in the center are the place where it all merges. It's the edge where the water and the land meet. And I went out on a kayak last weekend. And then the map is a 1906 map that works its way through the space. And then there's all these revisions that are kind of going through that. So it's really, it's like sketchy at this point, but it's going to be a kind of composite. The thing that also interests me here is that the scientists that work on these things all work in these squares. They work in units. So I'm going to try to take this idea of the unit as a almost as a pixel and sort of work my way through the project. Because there's so much information that is there. So I made, with a lot of trouble, I made these curved pieces, which will actually be lights that will light up the installation. I did that this summer. The Center for Contemporary Ceramics at Cal State Long Beach is really amazing. And they allowed me to work there this past summer. And really, I've been working in ceramics, but there's so much technical whatever that I don't know, some technical expertise that I don't have. And they've been very generous. But I think I was actually in tears on the day that Tony Marsh finally showed me how to successfully do these. So I had to make a mold and then take my forms and put them and fire them in the mold. And then
so they don't break in the firing, right?
Right, because what kept on happening was they kept twisting. I would stand them up instead of lying them down, and gravity just, yeah.
So where will the ultimate installation be?
Mine will be at the Oceanside Museum of Art. The curator is Cassandra Kovitz, and she is, there's 3 sites for the project that she's working on, and one is Crystal Cove, the other is LACMA, and then the third is OMA.
Oh, nice. Well, and that's a beautiful museum.
It is really beautiful.
I think it was, wasn't it designed? I think it was designed by Fred Fisher.
I don't know, but it's just the most perfect space because it's sort of under, there's all this flashiness about museums that doesn't have, but it's like perfect for artwork, and it's really beautiful. So,
and it's a usable space too, because they have a beautiful courtyard that kind of opens up. And yeah, I was very impressed by that when I first visited it.
Yeah, it's really
a number of years ago. Yeah.
So these are just some of the things that I'm thinking about. On the top right, that's really what a wetland looks like. It's sort of halfway, half water, half land. And again, the middle bottom is, one of the plants I'm working with. There are these tea sheets, which again, they're from 1850, and they are the whole coastline, which is like fabulous. So I'm working off of those maps, and they have, the original routes of the Santa Ana River and all of these other things that, and then this image on the left actually was from the Archaeological Museum in Arles, but it's just to remind me that it's an old water jug. And I'm thinking that that's a place where I might be able to put some of the text, is if I can build these collections of water for each of the 4 sites that I'm working from, and actually have text go around them, then that might be an interesting format.
That's interesting. It's interesting how you do your research, and the maps must be fascinating because there's all of the, the jetties that have been built, the harbors.
Yeah, one of the things that's
looked a little more raw.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I came across that's probably the most upsetting is that where I live, by the port, that it's all offset. So basically, the reason why these wetlands exist in other places is because the companies have to pay to have these carbon emission credits somewhere else.
Right.
So that's bad. And also the other thing that's kind of interesting is that a lot of these spaces are unusable, nor like they have no commercial value anyway. So in some cases, like one is right below the John Wayne Airport, fly zone, and another is right at the border, and so on.
Right.
So I think this is probably the last series of group of work. This was a show that I had at Wilding Cran in 2020, and it was a very bad month of March, as we all remember. But the show went on nevertheless. We hung it on the day of the lockdown, and it was with an artist named Paul Scott. And the idea was really that our work, or my work, with some of these motifs, and his work, his ceramic work with some of these motifs and the glitches were like I thought, a really fascinating connection. So his piece is on the left. These are just a sampling, like a studio sampling of what happens when I'm sort of making the center of some of these pieces that you'll see coming up. So the like hardware or ways to direct traffic. That piece is that's a piece from the Huntington. And it's something that I've worked with. So I'm really interested in this idea of working from ceramic motifs and plant life, and then kind of going backwards and finding out if they exist somewhere else.
If the
in the real
plants
world.
exist in reality, or
Yes.
Yeah.
So like looking at a plant and then trying to find it in the garden. This is also, so this is from that particular piece. And then I think this is at the Met, and it's I believe it's something from Munich. I believe it's a very early porcelain piece, and then I made a piece that follows from there. So it's sort of like taking these things apart and thwarting them in a different place.
Right.
This is a piece that has porcelain on the bottom that's woven through, and it has 3 different motifs that work its way through. One is like a doily, very small, from the home. Another is a floor in a Roman church, which is vast and universal. And then there's an Islamic pattern that works its way through the bottom. So to sort of see if there's any connection, that I can make a connection between those 3 parts.
And then you've got cording in the back. It looks like that. Is that woven or tied together to kind of create the structure that the
Yeah, it weaves its
fabric.
way through.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a part of the whole structure. It's what holds everything together. This is a piece that is also has to do with plants. There are different plants that came from a linen tea towel that are put all around. And actually, this isn't the latest, or I guess it is the latest slide. I often take these pieces apart and put them back together. But in this case, there's like a color wheel that goes in one direction, and then the values that change, you know, from the difference in wear of the jeans. This is also particular plants that are embroidered on top of cyanotypes.
And you're doing all the embroidery?
Yes. This is an ongoing project where I've been in every place that I go. I actually work with multiple to try to find out what the native plants are in that area, and then I find out how those plants are used, and that's all written. The notes are written on the underside, and this is a tile piece that can keep getting reconfigured and growing and
Is it
subtracting.
paper or is it?
Yes, they're
Yeah.
all drawings. They're painted on paper.
And are they attached, or do
No,
you pin them together?
no, they're just laying together on the floor.
Oh, okay.
You can, it's an odd, I'm shooting down at it from above.
Oh, okay. Wow. So it'll just keep growing as you keep
Yeah.
traveling.
And this is a piece that I began during the pandemic that was shown at my last show at Wild and Cran. It became a kind of map of all the work that followed. And these pieces were made they started out one a day, then it started out one a week, then it was a little longer. But they really started to be about the intersection between viral spread, basket weaving, you know, the Fibonacci series, thinking about how something naturally grows. And then again, that became sort of the model for other work. There's also dreams in here interspersed because somehow during the pandemic, I must have been getting a lot of rest or something. And I seem to be having more dreams than usual. I think that's not uncommon, or that wasn't uncommon. And so I was documenting
The
that.
rest and the anxiety and everything kind of all smushed together.
Yeah.
That I think caused people to have interesting dream life.
But I started to, again, think about the tiles and how they could be like a daily activity, you know, something that I'm still working with, of like, does something repeat as one unit, or does it repeat again, or does it expand into two units? Does it get turned in a different direction, and so on?
And
So
is
that's, you can
that's
see
the gallery.
and you can see the connection between these drawings and where some of the fabric pieces went.
See.
So, and this porcelain center was actually in one of the earlier slides, you know, that I'm just making these things and then they sort of take on the form. This, the images or the patterns that are here came from daily news activities on front pages, and most of them were from Afghanistan, unfortunately, at the time.
So Fran, we're actually at 1:00.
Oh my God. Okay.
I know. It's
How did
so
that
wonderful
happen?
talking with you. I'm just going to cruise through these images.
Okay. And also just to show the, like, where it's all going, maybe the very last, so everything is becoming, is dissolving more and pulling apart. So the form itself is dissolving, which I think is the next place where I'm heading.
Yeah.
That the painting is formless.
But these harken back to, they're like three-dimensional of some of the longer maps that you've done, and even those drawings you did around the medieval city. It seems very connected.
Yeah. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And this is the last image. This is actually unfinished, but it's also connecting with some Portuguese tiles and some of the cyanotypes that were, you know, that I had made from some of those stencils, and, you know, just pulling it together. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
And as you said, you have an additive process. It's just
yes.
kind of, you're pulling from everything and creating this compilation or composite.
And trying to merge boundaries instead of fortify them. I think that's really important. I mean, you know, we're not necessarily in the age of curiosity, but I want I want to propose that. So
That's beautiful. Well, Fran, thank you so much for your
thank
generosity
you, Meg.
and sharing all your work with us. And we really appreciate everyone attending today. And
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Our last talk of the year will be on December 1st with photographer Siri Carr, who's been out on a residency that I don't want to give it away too many details, but she's going to have some amazing new photographs from that experience. So I hope you will all join us. And I also, again, just want to say, if you've missed any of our talks from before, from the last couple of years, their recordings are on the YouTube channel for the Brentwood Art Center. So you can find them there. And I think that's it. Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you so much, Meg, for inviting me.
This is really wonderful. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.